Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, Season 1, Episode 2. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode. Scott is dead. I brought it up last episode. I was like, wow, because like I said, I think the fight against Gideon's the only fight Scott lost in the entire movie. So once again, the movie, not the comic. So it's interesting for his first bout to lose. And even later on, young Neil was like, yeah, but Scott's always won because the whole conversation was about the fact is that he's always going up against like higher level opponents. Once again, talking about this world where it's just like, yeah, that's a thing. So I thought it was like, is that BS? Is that wrong information that Gideon got? It's like, no, Scott's beaten everyone he's ever gone up against, and maybe we'll explore that more in a different episode. But it's like, yeah, and even Kim is like, yeah, but of course you can't win forever. But it's like, no, young Neil's like, yeah, it seemed like Scott would. And I love that we're at the funeral and everything. And, it's like, young Neil's like, oh my God, you're Ramona. You're the one that got Scott killed. I also love that I was right because we didn't see Knives' reaction to any of the stuff that was going down, because then it would have been pretty obvious about Ramona and Scott and everything. But because she had passed out, like when we saw her pass out in the episode, she was passed out because she wakes up and she's like, oh, where'd everyone go? It's like, yeah, everything's over after the bass player got beaten. But he got beat to death. It's like, yes, that's exactly what those words mean. And so she shows up at the funeral and just this classic, like, oh, the wife and the mistress meet at the funeral type of situation. So obviously Knives is still unaware, and so is Ramona, where they meet each other, and it's like, she's like, you're the one that got Scott killed. It's like, I think that's kind of unfair. And everyone's like, ooh, this is so juicy and dramatic, And Wallace being Wallace, his approach to it too, being like, yeah, I needed an excuse to wear black. Granted, I didn't want, it kind of sucks as under these circumstances. Even Home Dude, who's the head of the band, Steven was kind of like, yeah, at least now that you're kind of gone, that means we don't have to ever find out whether we sucked or not. So that's good, but it's also sucky it's under these circumstances. And I love that Envy ends up crashing the funeral. She's like, right, this is before I became the celebrity I did, and fact is I barely remember this relationship, which is so interesting. I love it because yeah, everyone here knows that we dated, and Knives is like, no, we all didn't know that. And it's like, you're part of my favorite band, and Steven's like, I thought we were your favorite band. She's like, well, no, Envy's part of my favorite real band. You guys are my favorite not real band. I was like, that's such a spit in the face. But the fact of the matter is she performs. And I thought it was so interesting where Ramona was kind of like, he dated her, and it's like, yeah. Can you imagine that? Like an ex getting like famous after you, which I'm like, I don't know if that's supposed to be. And she kind of goes, I don't know if that's supposed to be indicative of how some of her exes have, well, I don't think all of them, because I don't know if Roxy's necessarily famous, but at least Gideon kind of made a name for himself, so did Lucas, and I think Todd falls into that category as well. So like, she's got exes who've probably gotten famous after they broken up, so that was kind of interesting. But I love that. It's like, also, I love that I don't know if those are her own crew of photographers, or that's supposed to be like, the general paparazzi in this world being ninjas, and then like ninja running across like the chairs in the and then like also like taking photos, and you even see one of them kind of tearing up, being like, oh, this is so beautiful, when Envy's doing her performance, And just the moment she leaves, what was that thing of like, oh yeah, sign my neck? One person was like, step on my corpse. I was like, of course. So obviously, Ramona feels so bad about things playing out the way it has with Scott, so. And then we cut to the League of Exes being called upon. And at first, when that was all happening, I was like, is Ramona summoning all of them? But it's like, no, it's Matthew who ended up calling them all together. Once again, it's like, my only attachment to this is the movie. So obviously the movie changed stuff. It couldn't include everything. So we're getting like the League of X's actually meeting up and interacting, because we never got that at all in the movie. And so it's like literally a Legion of Doom meeting, and it's just so dope. And to just see them all sitting around. Even speaking of Roxy, because I brought up earlier, like, it's so interesting that she's like they're like, oh, she's like half ninja, which I'm like, dude, that was like so missing from her aesthetic in the movie that I don't know if that's something they're just changing for this or that was just who she was in the comic. But even her wearing kind of like that, like almost like Oni mask or like Akuma mask, that demon mask she's wearing, I think it's so interesting. It was like, that looks so badass, because like my own association with her is like, yeah, she shows up and she has a mallet. Like I said, we get to flush these characters out a lot more than we got obviously in the movie. Obviously you have like a lengthy graphic novel series to like be able to kind of like flush a lot of that out. And like I said, maybe this series is going to be able to flush things out even more than even maybe the comic book. I don't know, it depends on how they're handling it. Once again, if I was a little more knowledgeable in a comic book, I can say, but like I said, I only have the movie to kind of compare and contrast with. But all the X's getting together is so interesting. I do not remember Ken and Kyle at all. The twins, I'm like, what, they're twins? It's also kind of interesting, like, was it Ken she dated is number 5 and Kyle's number 6, so it's kind of got to be weird that you went from 5, you went to one twin to the next. That's got to be wild. I'm also curious to see what happens with that robot, considering they're making a point of focusing on it. Like I said, I don't remember them at all in the movie. Were they taking care of off screen? Did Scott even fight them? Like I remember Lucas, Todd, Roxy, Matthew, and Gideon, but I do not remember Ken and Kyle at all. I was also expecting the like episode of, like, not only did we get our focus on the villains and like Scott's only in like a few seconds of the episode, only voice-wise, so that was kind of interesting. When you're telling a story and you're literally pulling away from your main protagonist, it's always such an interesting thing. That can always work for you or against you. I guess it just depends on the story and like how long you're staying away from your main protagonist type of situation. But the fact is that the X's, in particular, Matthew has decided, like, right, the evil X's have kind of gone in one direction for so long. It's like, we need to move in a new direction. Because what are we going to do? I beat Scott, but Ramona still decided not to go with me. Which Gideon's like, you're literally at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to rankings. Like, I guess it's like the oldest amongst the X's, you're at the bottom of the barrel. So, like, of course you're not going to be anything. Because I guess the whole point was also like, yeah, X's that are more powerful than the last is supposed to be the whole thing anyway, but it is interesting for them to be like, no, I mean, it's once again, it's that video game logic too of like, you know, making your way up through the boss rush type of situation. But yeah, Matthew thought him and Ramona were going to get back together. She just paid him no mind after everything. In fact, he was like, wait, did anyone get in on video? Like, everyone just left. Like, no one was like, oh my God, you beat Scott. Like, everyone just kind of like, just no one was like, oh my God, what happened to Scott? The only person that was really like that was Knives. Everyone else was so nonchalant where it's like, yeah, it's a matter, you know, it sucks. Scott died. Man, it's such a bummer. But like, no one's like extremely, extremely heartbroken. I don't know if that was like, I wasn't paying attention if that was Stacy at the front with like Scott and her mom and dad or not, because there was someone you saw at the front kind of a lot more teary-eyed. I'm assuming that's like their parents, which once again, I don't even think was tackled at all in the movie. But yeah, I'm going to say that a lot, and I'm so sorry. I'm going to try and cut back on saying that at all, because it's going to get annoying hearing me say that, but I say it a lot with stuff that's like I have some familiarity with in some shape or form. I always do that, compare and contrasting, but either way, I'm going to try and pull away from that going forward. But at least as much, because it's going to get annoying hearing. I mean, I'm already annoying enough. I'm just going to make things worse if I keep doing that. But either way, the fact is that Matthew challenges Gideon for control of everything. I was thinking like, well, I know Gideon's kind of the final boss, so obviously he's going to whoop Matthew's ass. And him losing, I was like, I wasn't expecting that. I love that, subverting my expectations, because I thought it was going to be pretty clear cut, but I also love like them duking it out, and I love once again the animation and just like it legitimately plays out like an anime fight. I mean, that's the aesthetic they're going for, and I love the stylization of the fight and stuff, and just the shifting of locations and the use of like Matthew's powers. The fact is that he creates like, I think those are supposed to be like devilish Ramonas that he's using that fire beams, and like that super move was actually pretty dope. He makes a ball of energy and they kind of pass it around and trap him in this like beam of energy, and then they all zap him, and then Matthew comes in with the slam dunk, and how that was animated when it slams down on Gideon and he's on fire and is burning, and they're like, oh, he's on fire, which I'm like, is that supposed to be a reference? Because it's a reference I picked up from somewhere and I don't remember, but there's like a video game announcer when like, it might have been a basketball video game where it's just kind of like one of those like fantastical basketball games where it's like, oh, they've got superpowers when they're doing their super moves, and it's like, oh, he's on fire. Like, I mean, he was literally on fire, but I don't know if this is supposed to be a reference to that. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of, like, little video game references that might go over my head that'll probably be sprinkled in. This is the perfect property to be sprinkled in and stuff like that, considering the very, like, aesthetic they've got going on. I mean, once again, and I'm sure this was very true to, like, because the very, like, I love the comic bookness of, like, right, the punches and the slaps and the booms and the plops, like, being, like, words. I love stuff like that, because obviously the movie utilized that a lot. So I really think, I'm sure that was, like, very, very, very prevalent in the comic book as well, but I'm a graphic novel, and I just think that's so dope. I thought Matthew was kind of screwed once all his, like, ladies were kind of, like, removed from the board and Gideon was slicing and dicing them and deflecting their beams. And it's like, I do appreciate that scene where it's like the scene transition to they're breaking through the walls and it's like, oh, here's all the, 14 sheltered animals he owns and the businesses he owns, and they get to the safe and he breaks through and they're fighting on top of the roof. Matthew pulling out, my mind immediately goes to Shiva, because Shiva's the one. I'm not well versed in my, or am I thinking of Vishnu? Shiva has the multiple arms, right? But like he grew like 2 arms. I'm curious, like, can he grow more? Because doesn't Shiva have like 6 in total? I don't, or like I said, because now I'm like, Vishnu's the elephant god, isn't it? I think Vishnu's the elephant. I don't remember. But like him beating Gideon, and it's like, oh, we got to sign over everything. My business, my empire, my underwear. It's like, yeah, that was the deal. So he walks away with nothing, and Matthew's the leader now. And it's like, oh, you're going to live because I want you to live in misery. So I'm assuming Matthew's eventually going to come back and like, I mean, that Gideon's going to come back and take everything back. I was like, but like I said, for him to lose in the end, that's interesting. So what's Matthew going? Well, because he was like, he wants the league to be more than what it is. He's like, he wants there to be an opportunity for them to gain so much more after, like, right, I killed Scott, I send him to the afterlife. I do think it does speak volumes that Envy's like, oh, Scott Pilgrim? Yeah, like, Envy showed up at the funeral, and obviously Todd making a point, like, yeah, I'm dating Envy now. It's like, yes, we know that, dude. What is this, like, your first time at this meeting? We already know all that, homie. Once again, just being a little meta of like, yes, introducing the audience to that, but it's almost like a fourth wall thing of, why are you mentioning that? We here already know that. This isn't the first meeting for us, you know? So I love that stuff. And obviously Lucas just being like, oh, because Todd being like, oh yeah, I'm getting auditions, I'm going to movies, and I'm auditioning for movies and transitioning to that part of my career. Whereas like Lucas is like, oh yeah, like I don't even read scripts anymore. It's like, oh yeah, that's why like half your lines in that previous movie you did were "Let's party." Either way, so the League of X's have had a leadership change, which is interesting. And then we come back to Ramona at the end of the episode. Like, I love that her and Scott went on like one pseudo date, and obviously she's flashing back to those memories throughout last episode of them together, like at her place. And I even love that transition where like the music is playing, and then the moment she cuts off the light, the music like ceases too. I was like, oh, I love that. Little touches like that. And then as she's going through the subspace way, she hears Scott's voice, and she's, oh my god, he's alive. I also forgot to talk about it. I love that because the only thing that was left of him were like 3 kind of arcade coins or whatever, that's all that's in the casket. You know, it's like, well, that's technically all there is left of Scott. So once again, just the absurdity of this world, because no one questions it. It is what it is. And just we once again, this world has always been absurd. We're just kind of jumping in the middle of like, that's why everyone's so blasé and just kind of like blah, whatever about some crazy stuff that's happening. It's not that out of pocket for this world, because that is just the nature of this world. That's like, this is how it is, and it's just never going to be explained. So I love that type of situation of like, you just kind of have to accept it like a superhero universe when you're in the middle of it. It's like, yeah, it's a superhero universe. It is what it is. Like, crazy stuff is it's just the nature of this world. So I'm very, very excited to jump into the next episode and see where all of this ends up taking us. How does Scott come back? Does he have to go through what ends up happening that leads to him getting brought back? Like, is it just going to be on Ramona's side of thing? Is it going to be a combination of his friends and Ramona, or is it something he's got to do? It's going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good